and welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Wednesday, September 17th, 2025. Melting glaciers mean an uncertain future for Europe's rivers. The Rhone Glacier in Switzerland is the source of the Rhone River, which flows through Switzerland and France. Swiss glaciers, like this one, are melting quickly, reduced by nearly 2/3 of their ice over the past century. On a hotel veranda overlooking Lake Lucerne, Barbara Aigreiner sips a latte with a sigh, peers at sightseers boarding a tour boat. It's a warm summer afternoon, and the hot air over the turquoise water forms a haze that silhouettes the Alps in the distance. Aigreiner has moved from hotel to hotel like this one since late May, when she was forced out of her home. She had just begun a new job as manager of the storied Hotel Belfrep, perched along a mountainside above the village of Blatten. She and her crew were preparing for their first guest of the season, when suddenly the workers started running for the exits. They yelled, "We need to leave right now." And I'm like, why? What? How? And they literally jumped in their cars and left. And I was like, what's going on? Aigreiner calls. Across the valley from the hotel, on a peak towering over Blatten, the picturesque Birch Glacier was unbeknownst to the casual observer. On the move, scientists noticed it was starting to slide down the mountain faster than it had in decades, on a trajectory so dangerous that they rapidly persuaded the local government to immediately evacuate the village's 300 people. A week later, as predicted, the glacier broke loose. Video shot by visitor Vidas Brenner shows the glacier crashing down and the steep mountainside in a dramatic white cloud of ice, rock, and sand. Aigreiner was working in the hotel above the valley when the lights flickered and went dark. She went outside and hiked to a nearby cliff to see what had happened. It was beyond imagination, she says. The village is there, but there is no village. It's just a pile of mud and sand and rocks. You can't relate to that because this is the place where the village is supposed to be. Blaine's church, town hall, and homes were buried in an instant. An event of that size is certainly nothing I've seen in Switzerland before. Not in the recent past, says Daniel Fernati, a glaciologist at the public university ETH Zurich, which he had been observing the Birch Glacier for years. The $1 million question is, did Blaine happen because of climate change? Asked Fernati. And that's a super difficult question to answer, because pinpointing such a casualty for a single event, that is very difficult. What we can see is that there were elements in this process chain that may well be related to climate change. The fastest warming continent. Fernati and his team at ETH had observed increased rockfall from the glacier for more than a decade, a phenomenon he suspects was caused by warmer temperature in the Alps in recent years. Temperatures across Europe are increasing at twice the average global rate, and glaciers in the Swiss Alps have lost nearly 2/3 of their ice over the past century. Fernati has been studying these rapid changes for years. According to his team, at ETH Zurich. Switzerland's glaciers lost half their volume between 1931 and 2016. But then in the next 6 years alone, they lost an additional 12% of their ice. Wearing crampons, a harness, and a backpack full of monitoring equipment, Ferrinotti leads a team of his students up a pockmarked, dirty ice of the Rhone Glacier, the source of the Rhone River, which flows to France. One by one, they carefully leap over crevices, whose icy depths emanate blue light and the echoes of meltwater flowing through a network of cracks and caverns below. They stop to set up a monitoring station that'll track how quickly this glacier is melting, as his team erects a pole with a GPS receiver and a solar panel. Ferrinotti peers at the granite mountainsides, looming more than 500 feet high on either side of the ice. In 1850, the glacier was flush with those ridges, he says. In the past decade, though, it has melted much faster. Ferrinotti says the data his team has collected so far shows a stark year-by-year reduction of ice in the Rhone Glacier. Where we are standing, we are losing several meters of ice a year, he says. Maybe 5 or 6 meters in thickness. And in terms of length, it's like a dozens of meters a year. That's 2, 3, 4% of the glacier each year. And at that rate, says Ferrinotti, if we stay on track with the climate we have at the moment, then that brings up a very warm climate, and that would mean that this glacier disappears later this century. He says matter-of-factly, so by 2100 you wouldn't find any ice anymore. Ferrinotti calls glaciers nature's water towels. The water they've stored for centuries flows down Europe's biggest river during the hot and dry summer months, replacing rainwater and snowmelt from the spring. If you think of a catchment or an area where you have a glacier and you envisage a very dry, hot summer, well, you will get water because the glaciers are melting. He explains. If you go to the same area and remove the glacier, while in a very dry, hot summer, you don't get a droplet. So the timing of which the water will come will change. And this is what the concern is about. The Rhone isn't the only river whose source is a glacier in the Swiss Alps. The Rhine, the Danube, the Po, the continent's biggest rivers all start here. And when these glaciers are gone, Ferrinotti says these rivers will be forever altered, preparing for a glacierless future. Hundreds of miles downstream from the Alps, Stefan Bauer leans over the rail of a tugboat to check the river's depth. Here in Duisburg, a port city on the lower reaches of the Rhine River in western Germany, a massive digital sign reads 250 centimeters in red neon. So the normal water level is around 3 meters, 50 centimeters. And now we are 1 meter less compared to the normal situation, he says, with a furrowed brow. Bauer is a CEO of HGK Shipping, which builds barges that carry a range of goods up and down the Rhine. The main transportation artery of Germany's economy, he says in recent years, the late summer months have meant record low depths on the Rhine. The low water situation was also in the past. It was always there, he says. But the problem is that now it stands longer. For a longer period, we are in this situation. So it's now lasting 2, 3, up to 4 months. especially in the late summer, and that's a huge impact. In the hot, dry summer of 2018, the water level in the Rhine was so low that barges could no longer navigate the river. That got Bauer thinking about the German builds its barges. All the barges were heavily constructed to load the maximum capacity. We now need to rethink that, Bauer says. Since the drought of 2018, Bauer's engineers have been hard at work, designing a fleet of low-water barges that can transport up to 600 metric tons of goods. In just 1.2 meters, or just over 3 feet of water. But in an industry that builds just 100 barges a year, he says it'll take a while to adjust to these new water levels. Back on the Rhone Glacier, glaciologist Farinotti's team is preparing to test how quickly water is flowing off the glacier. First of all, we put a salt dilution in the stream there, and when we have 2 measuring points where we measure the salt concentration, explains Michel Dreyfus, holding a bottle of the solution. And with that, we can examine how much water is coming in the time period. Dreyfus also adds a visual element to the test of water flow, a colored dye. Within seconds of pouring it in, the glacial stream turns bright pink, flowing over a waterfall where the bubble-colored cascade disappears into a crevasse. It's a striking visual element for visiting photographers, but for Farinatti, the more shocking visuals can be seen year to year as the glacier recedes before his eyes. Glaciers have become a bit of a symbol of climate change, just because they are so powerful in visualizing the change. Farinatti says, when we talk climate change, we are talking about 1 degree of warming of global average temperatures. What does that mean? If you think of heating up your house 1 degree more, do you feel it? Well, maybe. If you look at 1 degree of warming does to a glacier, you don't need to be a scientist to figure out, whoa, that's a big change. It's a big change, he says, that will have a cascade of consequences on rivers, on the ecosystem, and all of Europe. From heart to skin to hair, Replaceable You dives into the science of transplant. Science writer Mary Roach is fascinated by the human body, especially, she says, the gooey bits and pieces of us that are performing miracles on a daily basis. Take the human heart, for instance. If we're lucky, Roach says, our hearts might continue beating for 80 plus years. What thing that you buy at Best Buy keeps going that long? She asks. Roach is known for her books about what makes the human body so remarkable. She's done deep dives on human cadavers, the digestive system, and the science of sex. Now, in Replaceable You, Adventures in Human Anatomy, she chronicles both the history of body part replacement, including prosthetic noses that date back to the 1500s, as well as more recent medical breakthroughs. The book was inspired by a woman Roach knows with spina bifida, whose gait was impeded by a twisted foot. The woman was seeking to have her foot surgically amputated and replaced with a prosthetic limb, when she encountered an unexpected impediment. Surgeons were reluctant to remove what they considered a healthy limb, even though the patient could not walk on it. And I thought that was interesting. the reluctance of surgeons to remove a foot because it is an act with some finality to remove a foot. Roach says. Roach's book describes how advancements in gene editing and 3D printing technology might further make our anatomy replaceable. She profiles scientists in lab at Carnegie Mellon University who's used a 3D printer to create a tiny ventricle, which was used to pump the heart of a mouse. But she adds the Trump administration's cut to medical research threatened to interrupt the pipeline of innovation and discovery. That's going to have terrible effects further down the line, Roach says. Just looking forward to the future of innovation and medical care. It's very depressing. Interview highlights on why pigs became the animal used in organ transplant. You can, to a certain extent, blame Hormel, the pork company. What happened in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there was a project. It was a collaboration between the Mayo Clinic, the Mayo Foundation, which was the research arm of pork. The goal here was to create a smaller pig, a pig that would be a good match in terms of not just the size of human organs, but the functions. There were all these studies were done looking at, do pigs get coronary artery disease? And it turns out they do. In fact, the pig was described in one of their papers as a caricature of an obese human. In other words, gets heart disease, has heart issues, doesn't get enough exercise. If you're going to use the pig as your model, as your stand-in for a human, then you want to make sure that these organs behave similarly, that they have a similar size. So this research, once it got rolling, and there were dozens and dozens of papers, 3 volumes of papers looking at kidney function, liver function. There was one on orthodontia, where they had put braces onto pigs. So it was all toward the goal of creating an analog, a stand-in for a human being for trying out surgical techniques, or not so much pharmaceuticals, but techniques and replacements. So the pig became the go-to creature. I mean, who knows? A goat might have been equally useful, but nobody started using goats. On preventing the body from rejecting a pig organ. With an organ that's coming from another species, the reaction is quite severe. It's called a hyperacute rejection, where within minutes, the body starts to attack. The organ starts to turn back, starts to turn black. You don't want to put a pig organ into somebody without it having been genetically edited. So one of the things that's edited is something called the alpha-gal protein. And this is a surface protein that the body, if you can knock that out, you're basically just making the pig organ seem a little less pig-like and a little more human-like. So now you're dealing with the level of rejection that you would get with a human transplant. In other words, taking some other human organ and transplanting it. So the person is still on an immunosuppressant regimen, taking drugs to suppress the immune system, but on about the same level as they would with a human. On if a pig transplant is kosher. I asked the surgeon who was involved in the first pig transplant, and he said, yeah, there are a lot of folks, both in the Jewish religion and the Muslim religion, who really wish we choose a different species. But I had been asking him, why pigs? And he says, I get that question all the time. The thing is, he said, we're not eating them. We're saving lives. So it's okay to get a pig organ if you're keeping kosher. There were interviews with various religious thought leaders, and there was consensus that it is needed. That it is indeed okay to have a pig organ implanted. Just don't eat it. On experiments, 3D printing muscle and tissue. I spent a day at the Feinberg lab at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. And what people were working on there was trying to print muscle in a way that the alignment of cells would create muscle that had the specific function that muscle needed. In other words, the heart needs to move in a kind of twisting motion. It twists as it pumps, so you've got to print the cells. They have to be in a helix shape, which is a different form, say from the hamstring, where it'd be kind of parallel, or the shoulder muscle. They're in a fan-like shape, which gives you a lot of versatility of the movement of the shoulder. So you're not just printing generic muscle. You have to print it in a very specific way to achieve the function that you want it to be doing, which I found kind of amazing. No one is printing whole organs. That's way off in the future. On the tediousness of tissue recovery for organ donations. When I arrived in the room where they were doing the tissue recovery, where they would be extracting the bone and the tendon and the skin, etc., one of the people doing it said to me, this is the worst part of the job. And I kind of assumed, and I had preconceived notions of what the worst part of the job might be. But she was talking about handwriting on labels, the same ID number over and over, double checking, cross checking, the amount of paperwork and labeling, and then at the end, packing and shipping was the tedious and unpleasant part of her job. Not the opening of a leg and extracting of bone and ligament. I guess I just wasn't expecting that. On how knowing too much about how our bodies work can get in your head. When I wrote gulp, I became really aware of what's going on in your mouth when you chew. The process of bolus formation, where you're taking a piece of meat, say, and you're breaking it down and you're putting it back together in a bolus. That's a shape that can slide down your throat. And I visited somebody who studies chewing in this process and what jaws do. And I remember for a while after that going to restaurants and thinking, looking around at people chewing and swallowing and thinking, this is disgusting. People should have sex in public and eat in private. It's absolutely disgusting. Utah files murder charges against Tyler Robinson. This photo is released by the Utah Governor's Office on September 12th. Shows Tyler Robinson. Tyler Robinson, the man accused of fatally shooting conservative influencer Charlie Kirk, was charged with aggravated murder and other counts in a case in which prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. The murder of Charlie Kirk is an American tragedy, said Utah County Attorney Jeff Gray at a news conference on Tuesday. Charlie Kirk was murdered while engaging in one of our most sacred and cherished American rights. Authorities have also charged Robinson with firearm counts and multiple obstruction of justice charges for allegedly disposing of clothes he wore during the shooting. He is accused of directing his roommate to delete incriminating messages and not speak with investigators after Kirk was killed. Investigators say surveillance footage showed Robinson walking with a peculiar gait they believed indicates had a rifle hidden in his pants. The weapon, a bolt-action rifle, is thought to have been a gift from his grandfather. Prosecutors say Robinson wrapped the gun in a towel and placed it in a wooded area after the shooting. Robinson's mother told investigators that Robinson had in recent months become more political and had started to lean more to the left, becoming more pro-gay and trans rights oriented, according to the court papers. Investigators interviewed Robinson's roommate, who was not identified by name. Authorities say the roommate was male transitioning to female with whom Robinson had been romantically involved. The roommate received a text message from Robinson the day of the shooting, according to the authorities, that read, "Drop what you are doing. Look under my keyboard." The roommate did so. A note was found that stated, "I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and I'm going to take it." Robinson allegedly told his roommate, "I had enough of his hatred," referring to Kirk. "Some hate can't be negotiated out." Robinson, 22, made an initial court appearance Tuesday afternoon by video stream from Utah County Jail. He did not enter a plea and does not yet have a defense lawyer, but a public defender is expected to represent him. Judge Tony Graff read the charges against him. Robinson appeared stoic and did not speak, beyond stating his name to the judge. Robinson's next court date is slated for September 29th. A memorial sits in front of Utah Valley University following the fatal shooting of political activist Charlie Kirk. During the event at the campus, September 12th, 2025, in Orem, Utah. After a 33-hour manhunt, authorities arrested Robinson, who is being held without bail at the Utah County Jail. Since Robinson was apprehended, speculation has filled the void of hard information about his exact motive, but officials have suggested he was politically motivated. Utah Governor Spencer Cox said on Sunday that Robinson held beliefs consistent with leftist ideology. According to Cox, Robinson was radicalized in a fairly short amount of time, following dropping out of college after one semester and moving back to his hometown in Washington, Utah, a southwestern pocket of the state known for its red rock landscape and proximity to Zion National Park. Robinson, according to Cox, had been living with a romantic partner, who Cox said was shocked upon finding out that the shooting at a campus event where Kirk appeared to debate students at Utah Valley University, about 4 hours from where Robinson lived. Utah County Attorney General Jeff Gray speaks Tuesday during a press conference regarding Tyler Robinson, the suspect in the shooting of Charlie Kirk. Gray announced Robinson is charged with 7 counts, including aggravated murder, in the killing of Kirk last week on the campus of Utah Valley University. Cox said the partner has become the subject of intense focus, considering Kirk's disdain for transgender rights. But authorities have not zeroed in on what particular political positions are believed to have motivated Robinson to kill. Investigators say Robinson is what some would call chronically online, a person who spends inordinate amounts of time on messaging platforms, on social media, and playing video games. Speaking on NBC's Meet the Press, Cox said Robinson navigated that deep, dark internet. The Reddit culture and these other dark places of the internet where this person was going deep. In the rifle, believed to be Robinson's, investigators recovered bullet casings that include inscriptions referencing edgy internet memes and jokes in the gaming community. That would be indecipherable to anyone not steeped in those subcultures. Other inscriptions include "Hey Fascist, Catch," and "Oh Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Ciao, Ciao," a famous old Italian anti-fascist anthem. In text messages in Tuesday's court papers, Robinson allegedly told his roommate that the bullet engravings were inspired by memes, writing sarcastically to the roommate that he would have a stroke. In news organizations, specifically Fox News, had to mention the memes on air. President Trump is set to attend Kirk's funeral in Arizona on Sunday. Kirk is survived by his wife, Erica Kirk, and their two children, ages 1 and 3. Turning Point USA, a conservative youth political organization, Kirk co-founded that is active on more than 3,000 college campuses, says Kirk's American Comeback Tour will continue, with the next event slated for Colorado State University in Fort Collins on Thursday. Since Kirk's death, a debate has raged about how best to remember a decisive figure who often pushed extreme views, but who was an organizing powerhouse and helped mobilize young voters to the polls for Trump. Kirk leaned into proactive and conservative positions on issues like abortion, the death penalty, race, and gay and transgender rights. Just before a single shot from 140 yards struck him in the neck. 31-year-old Kirk was answering a question about the prevalence of transgender perpetrators in mass shootings.